This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
For this episode of Leap Forward, Andy Turbefield talks about his vast experience in the automotive sector. From his early days as a mechanic to his leadership role at Halfords, Andy discusses how electric vehicles, emerging technology, and modern training methods are redefining the industry. With over 30 years of insight, Andy's journey offers a rare perspective on the ever-evolving automotive world. Let's dive into the conversation. Hi everyone, I'm Justin Cook, I'm chairman of Bridge, and you are listening to our Leap Forward podcast series. Today I'm really delighted to welcome Andy Turbefield to the studio to have a conversation. Andy has really been operating in the industry for more than 35 years. A huge number of accolades, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Andy, because I think you do very much kind of embody everything that we're trying to do at Bridge and everything that we're looking to kind of talk about. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Let's kick off and give us a bit of a sort of a career kind of whistle-stop tour.
I'll try and be as brief as I can. I've been around this planet for a little while now, so I suppose I come from a family of car mechanics. That's the easy way of wording it. My grandfather built a garage in a little village in Gloucestershire on the turn of the century, the last one. And in one of these sorts of places that was the hub of a community. And so, back then cars were quite new. And so it was a sort of place that would look after motorcycles and cars and farm machinery and you name it. They would find ways of fixing it. Because, of course, the original car mechanics were blacksmiths. So my father took on the garage from my grandfather, and then I think there was always a desire for me to do the same thing. And I worked with my father for probably 5 or 6 years as I was going through my training, and then realised that actually I wanted something a bit more. And I could see the way the future was going. The small little independent garages were getting harder to operate. Big multi-site businesses like Halfords were coming along. And so I left and I went to work for Halfords in 1993 as a car mechanic. And I'm still here today. It's been quite a journey over that period of time. I've had many Different roles over that period. But here I am today as head of quality for Halfords.
So let's just kind of remind everyone sort of in sizing Halfords been around since 1892. You operate both in terms of consumer and B2B. Was it 12,000 or so colleagues, something like that?
It's certainly getting on that way now. Halfords is no longer one company; it's a group of businesses under the Halfords Group. So we've got our circa 600 odd auto centres, circa 400 stores. We've got about 250 Halfords mobile expert vans. Those are the guys and girls that go around doing the sort of jobs on people's driveways and places of work that you can get done in a car park at a store. Batteries, bulbs, blades, that sort of thing. And that side of the business is just continuing to expand its offer. But we've also moved into the commercial tyre world. So we've been buying up various commercial tyre businesses. And that's looking after all sorts of things like trucks and buses and earth movers and tractors and all sorts. So it's quite a monster now. And consequently, it's obviously a good thing because what it also brings, which is quite new to us, is the ability for colleagues to move between organisations, between the businesses. So it helps to keep people fresh. It gives them new opportunities, which is obviously keeps the world going.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, going back to kind of learning from your father, I'd be really interested to kind of know how that relationship dynamic kind of worked. But obviously you've been on as well as a major kind of career trajectory, you've also had some major moments in terms of learning and training yourself on that kind of Halfords journey.
Yeah, so my dad was my biggest teacher. I learned everything there is to everything I know about cars today was born from what my dad taught me. And as soon as I was old enough to hold a spanner, I was in the workshop. So from a very early age, and that's kind of one of the reasons why ultimately I moved on.
Yeah. Can I just ask, because I think it's really interesting. How did he make you fall in love with it? He's sounds like a great teacher.
There is something about taking things apart, working out how they operate, how they work, what makes them tick, and then putting them back together again. And when you add the sort of when it's not quite working as well as it should be, and then you get the ability, the skill to be able to then make it work better. There are few things in life that can give you that kind of satisfaction, from my point of view. So I always like to, and of course within that small little business, you got to see everybody. So you dealt with customers, you dealt with parts suppliers, you dealt with everybody as a mechanic, So it really sort of gave you great communication skills. And I think that's some of the things that you miss in some of the larger places, whereby you might be working in a workshop out the back and then you've got the front of house at the front. And, those sorts of environments are quite close-knit. So I think, working with my dad and right back in the beginning, my granddad used to sit on a stool at the back of the garage and watch it all going on, It really did sort of set me up in life for this desire to learn, this desire to understand what makes things tick. And when I joined Halfords, that just obviously continued because Halfords, way back in the day, 1993, Halfords Service Centres, as they were called then, we did, I think we had all of our training delivered by the AA at Widmerpool, which was this old stately home out in the back of Loughborough. Wonderful place to go. I put my name down for every course possible because I just wanted to, how do I get from here to there? How do I get further on in my career? And I had a great mentor at the time who said, just get on every training course you can. So I did. When you talk about moments, there have been a few moments, and there was a moment. Yeah. There was a moment when I got to that point where I didn't want to be a mechanic anymore. I felt the need to no longer get my hands dirty. And so I wanted to move into management. And so, again, I was given great advice. Apply for every interview, apply for every opportunity. No matter where it is in the country, apply for it because you get your name out there. People get to see you. You get the experience of sitting in interviews. And so I did, and I went for an interview up in Perry Bar in North Birmingham, which was probably a couple of hours away from where I lived. And I thought, there's no way, even if they would offer me the job, there's no way I could actually do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. And I went to this interview, and my regional manager at the time, who later became a mentor of mine, he asked me this question in this interview. And the question was, Andy, how would you motivate a technician, a car mechanic? Sorry, we call them technicians these days, but I'll always be a car mechanic. How would you motivate a technician? And I sat there thinking, this has got to be a trick question. And I thought, what motivated me at the time? And I thought, should I say that? And in the end, I gave him a stock answer. I said, look, as long as I've got a clean environment, I've got the tools that I need to do the job, and I've got people around me that help me, then that's what motivates me. And he looked me in the eye and he said, Andy, that's absolute rubbish. He said another word, but he said, if you want to motivate technicians, you've got to develop them. You've got to, motivation is the key. Development is the key to motivation. Because if you develop people and you give them a goal to aspire to, they'll move mountains for you. And it just stuck there. That statement that he gave me stuck in my head. And it was some years later, obviously from that moment on, I got into management and I managed garages and I managed regions and it was probably, when was that? That would have been late 90s. So it was in the mid 2010s, I suppose, when I finally got into training and was able to then realise that statement and then start building the training strategy for Halfords Auto Centres and building our training academies and growing the relationship with the IMI. We were the first training provider to deliver MOT testing outside of the DVSA. It was, and building that whole piece of taking technicians and moving them through a career pathway, putting them through training courses, giving them goals to aspire to, and rewarding them at steps along the way, really created this phenomenal culture of learning within Halfords. And because technology is moving at such a rate now that you have to keep inspiring people in order to try and keep up with it.
That's a great sort of segue into kind of, thank you for that, by the way, that's great. And what a base from which to build. And, kind of, you've gone through that process of your own development, and then you're then able to kind of then build on that, in terms of running things for Halfords. Pace of change. Let's fast forward to today, effectively. Key challenges.
Well, there are many. If I was to look at sort of certainly the auto centre world, key challenges today is definitely skills, finding the right skills, being able to develop the right skills. And it's easy to just say the word skills, but actually what you're really talking about is people, It's getting harder and harder to get, and I'm going to say young people here, to get young people interested in automotive.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, Michael Jackson said, the young people are our future and all that. It probably wasn't Michael Jackson, but you know what I mean. There are so many other competing industries now for the youth of today that we as an automotive sector have to find ways of making ourselves attractive, and probably more attractive than some of these other things that attract young people into jobs. And one of those things is the stereotype. If you think of the stereotype of the car mechanic, what do you see? You tend to see somebody in perhaps a grubby pair of overalls, grease and oil on their hands and fingers, maybe on their face. You see it on the TV. You see Phil Mitchell and Kevin Webster, and and we're not helping ourselves with things like that. And because of technology changing, actually the reality is, car mechanics now, we refer to them as technicians because they are technicians, and they're working on vehicles that aren't necessarily have oil and grease in them anymore, and particularly when you talk about electric cars and things like that. And so therefore, young people that are looking at career pathways, perhaps into IT or data analysts or that sort of area, could potentially be the car technicians of the future if we can only provide an environment and a vision that appeals to that young person. So those are probably some of the biggest challenges, because, if I think back even 5 years, the technicians that are coming into the industry today are not as good as they were 5 years ago. And they weren't as good as 5 years ago as what they were 10 years ago. So you sort of seeing this skills decline in automotive at the moment. And that is very, very challenging for us.
And is that because people are making a choice to progress their careers elsewhere? Or is there a sort of, because you've mentioned skills and people, it's sort of I'm trying to decouple the two a little bit. Is it a skills challenge, a skills crunch, as it were? Or is it a combination of?
It is, unfortunately, the easy answer is it's a combination of. Automotive hasn't helped itself. We haven't done enough to build the skills of the future 5 years ago. Apprenticeship numbers are down and have been falling for many, many years. Young people that go into further education go to college. They leave school to go to college. As we know, young people have to stay in education until they're 18. And so I visit many colleges, and I speak to many young people that are on automotive courses. And it leaves me often with the opinion that very few of them actually want to be vehicle technicians. They just chose that box. They ticked that box when they were leaving school because it looked like the easiest one, perhaps. And so they're there for a couple of years, and then they move out into wherever, retail or whatnot. They fail to be able to continue that pathway. And so when you look at 100 students in a college, you might find 15 of them that might ultimately become technicians. And that's a shocking statistic, really. And of course, what that means is, well, how do you deal with it? And of course, one of the ways that we're trying to deal with it is to look at a much wider and much more diverse community. And so if you're always looking at that sort of very narrow skills gap, that very narrow pool of young people, then you're always going to be in that restricted zone. So if you can widen that pool into areas that perhaps wouldn't normally have thought about being technicians or have been ignored by society, perhaps, then actually there are some really good people that can develop some really good skills that can actually then come into automotive. And that's kind of one of the areas that we're trying to work on at the moment, one of the many.
And how are you doing that?
Well, you probably know that we set up a relationship with First Step Trust based in Woolwich back in 2017. Now I can't believe it's that long ago. I was introduced to Ronnie Wilson, their CEO, by Steve Nash, the CEO of the IMI. He asked me if I would have a chat with Ronnie and see if there's anything we could do. And I met with Ronnie. I met with their people, and I saw something that was really exciting. Which is basically where they provide support for people that might be termed unemployable, people with disability, whether that be mental health, or be physical, or so forth. And they put them through programs to help build their confidence and make them employable. And of course, what Ronnie really needed was an employer. So here we are. And so we've been working with Ronnie and the team to, help them develop training material to be able to train the people. We've been providing work placements for them. And just recently, in the last 18 months, we've been finding actual work employment for young people through First Step Trust. And that's been amazingly exciting and incredibly rewarding, because I mean, one of the young people that we put into our Woolwich site is the life and soul of that garage. And actually, talking with the divisional director recently, we've both got a goal now to open a garage that consists of young people from First Step Trust. And I should say, they're not just young people, they're people of all ages, actually. But that's a goal that we will achieve one way or another. We've also been working with Andy Palmer, Dr. Andy Palmer, and the Palmer Foundation. So I'm a board trustee for that charity, that foundation. And that's, Andy Palmer, former CEO of Aston Martin, Nissan, the godfather of the EV, as some people call him. He set up this foundation to try and create apprenticeships for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And it was sort of the bringing together of the Palmer Foundation, First Step Trust, London South East colleges, which is where a lot of young people come from those sorts of backgrounds. The IMI, because they award the qualifications. So one of the things that we needed to do was work with the IMI to make the qualifications more rounded so that they're able to be completed better by people that perhaps haven't got all of the maths and English tick boxes, And of course, we need an employer. So it was a 5-partner piece. We called it FAST, the Future Automotive Skills Talent. And it was designed and is designed to provide work for people furthest from employment. We've now got 9 people working for us that have come from the programme in its trial. They're all doing exceptionally well. And we're beginning the next intake this year soon. So our ultimate aim with FAST was that once we'd proved the concept worked, was to give it to automotive. This is our gift. Use this program to go out there and create more diverse employees, communities, businesses, because one thing's for certain, if you want to have a successful business going forward, your business must reflect the community that it tries to serve. So it's no good having a garage that's full of 30, 40-year-old white men, because 50% of the customer base that come and see you are female, So you've got to create this environment where you are truly reflecting what you are trying to deliver.
Almost going back to perhaps, where you started out in one sense, in terms of that sort of sense of community. I think it's fascinating to kind of hear that. And what was also really interesting was you focused kind of primarily, when you were talking about skills, you were talking about confidence and you were talking about communication, which you yourself, kind of reflected on in your kind of opening gambit. And I just want to kind of zero in a little bit more on the skills part of what we're talking about here, in terms of, so they're the power skills, as it were, that you've sort of made some examples of there. What are the other kind of skills, from a competency perspective that we need? So you've used the term technician, so therefore the assumption is it's to do with tech. But unpack that for me a little bit.
I guess, what is a car technician? What is somebody that works on cars? I mean, there are different levels of technician, from basic fast fit world, as you might call it, changing tyres and basic servicing, moving up to what we call diagnostic technicians, those that can find faults and use electronic equipment to be able to delve into a vehicle. And then you get up to sort of master tech, where the sorts of people that can help support the learning of others and really get in deep. Those are all technical skills. They're skills that are taught you know, as a technician, you've got to be able to receive it. You know, it's downloaded into you. You've got to be able to take that information on and then use it at the time when the time is needed. You know, it's a known fact that people on training courses only retain 20 to 30% of the information that they were trained. So it's certainly about making sure that they are picking up the key pieces that they need to know. In our world, in Halfords, we see every make and model and age of vehicle. So that helps those technicians build those skills because they see everything. It's not like they're in a one make franchise where they're only seeing the same make and model of car.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I like to think that the technicians that work in Halfords and similar companies to us are some of the best in the trade because they have that. But more and more now, it is becoming an absolute need for those technicians to be able to communicate properly.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
There's this thing about trust. The automotive trade is a naturally untrusted trade, isn't it?
Yep.
You know, when you think about it, you know, how do you know that the person that's fixing your car is doing what they should be doing? How do you know that they're not overcharging you? How do you, all of these sorts of things? And I could say the same for other trades, you know. So how do you build this thing about trust? Well, one of the ways that you can do it is to get your technician to talk to your customer. Take out the middleman, middlewoman, you know. But it's not easy. Technicians working underneath cars in these metal boxes, they don't necessarily build those skills to be able to talk to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. So I think, you know, those are some of the areas that you've got to work on. And that's why, you know, I sit on both of the trailblazer groups for the apprentice standards, level 2 and level 3. And the level 2 auto care apprenticeship isn't just this is how to do the basics of cars. It includes things like communication skills, being able to talk to customers, being able to order parts, being able to look after the environment that you work in. And to me, that's absolutely vital because it isn't just about fixing cars. Does that help you out with your question?
Yeah, no, it's a great answer, and it sort of leads me on to kind of follow up, I suppose, in a sense, because you know the tech of technician in a kind of modern world meaning is, you know, technology, right, sort of, rather than technical. And so, you know, we talk about, you know, the sort of the change that's going on in the sector at the moment, and the sort of the number of kind of electronic components in vehicles, and you know, the number of chips and the amount of data, and then you add then EV, as you were saying earlier, sort of in terms of the traditional oil and so forth, right? The shift that we're going through. So how is that sort of impacting you and the sector, I suppose, in a sense, as Halfords and more broadly, you know, when it comes to you even talked about English and maths. You know, what are you looking for? What's in the modern day's toolbox? You know?
So going forward, it is our biggest challenge going forward. In automotive now, it is the biggest challenge. The rate of change is moving at such a pace. You've probably heard phrases like there's more things have changed in automotive in the last 10 years than have in the last 100. Well, more things are going to change in the next 5 than they have done in the last 2. You know, it is moving at such a rate. Electrification of vehicles is only one thing, and a lot of stuff you hear in the press today is all about electric vehicles, isn't it? You know, everybody's got to convert to EV. You know, we're in London today. Every other car I see, if not most cars I see, is some kind of electrified vehicle. That has new skills challenges, both in terms of the technology that needs to be learned to be able to work on those vehicles, but also the health and safety side of it as well, because these things generate, you know, 800 to 900 volts. They work on direct current. Well, that's the same sort of stuff you use on electric chairs to kill people in the States, you know. So you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to know what cables not to touch.
Yep.
So there's that piece of it. But bigger than that, you mentioned data and connectivity. You know, cars now are, you know, some people refer to them as mobile phones on wheels. The technology is probably greater than that. There's more technology in a car today than what there is to get a jumbo jet to take off the ground, you know? And so that in itself is a monster challenge. But what it does mean is it means that it opens up opportunity to people that perhaps haven't already started their career as a technician. And that's kind of what I was referring to earlier. You know, in the apprentice standards piece, there is absolutely now a need to diversify away from internal combustion engine training. You know, there are vehicle manufacturers now that are only making electric cars. Why do they want to employ somebody on an apprenticeship and they have to go to college to learn about internal combustion? It's a question. And I've had to change my own thinking because only recently, I was of the opinion that I wanted car mechanics to be generalists. I wanted them to have all of the skills. I wanted them to be able to work on petrols, diesels and hybrids and electric cars. And to an extent, I still do, but I recognise now the need for potentially electric vehicle only qualifications. Because and that might be a way of again attracting these young people in. Connectivity and data is a huge piece. Most vehicles on the road now are connected in some way. They provide data that goes to the cloud. They're capable of talking to each other. They're capable of talking to infrastructure. They're capable of talking to their charge point that they plug into. So there's massive amounts of data that is now coming out of vehicles, going all over the place, whether we like it or not. That presents new challenges for us, and one of them is cybersecurity. So we have to, vehicle manufacturers are finding new ways to lock their vehicles down to the aftermarket, of which we represent. It's always been a bit of a them and us thing over the years. We've always found our ways that we need to be able to access vehicles, but it's getting harder because of data, because of cybersecurity. And there is going to come a time whereby vehicle technicians and garages and vehicle business owners are going to need to be able to prove that they are ethically sound, that their people are suitably trained and qualified to be able to access these vehicles, to be able to do what needs to be done. Because simple tasks now require that part that you fitted to be coded to that vehicle. Now, sometimes that can be just coding it to the car's brain. But increasingly now it means connecting the car to the cloud, to the manufacturer, opening the doorway, for want of a better word, and then passing the information through the doorway to the manufacturer to say, we fitted this, switch it on. And then back to the car it comes and away it goes. So all of those interventions are risks to vehicle manufacturers. And so therefore cybersecurity is one of the big challenges that's sort of being presented to us. And of course, things like advanced driver assistance systems, ADAS as it's referred to. Most vehicles now have got up to 9 of these things fitted in order to get through insurance group testing. Well, all of those things require calibration. They've all got to be fitted in the right way. They've all got to do what they need to do. And there are things that happen on cars now that can impact that stuff. And so the basic stuff we've been doing over the years, year after year after year, now impacts on all of those sorts of electronics. So again, a lot of people might think, oh my God, doom and gloom, it's going to be really hard. I don't see it that way. I see it as being just a massive opportunity. The next 10 years are the biggest opportunity for automotive that we've ever seen because of the way that technology is going. I find it just incredibly exciting.
Yeah. And what like you talk about young people, the inverted commas. How do you go back to yourself? How do you teach kind of this generation, right? Tell me about that.
Crikey. It's interesting, it's almost like speaking a foreign language sometimes, You've got to understand how millennials tick. And actually, it's not millennials anymore. It's alphas.
Gen Z. Well, Gen Z and then the alphas are on their way.
Alphas are on their way. But my daughter is a millennial. And my daughter and I have a very good relationship. And she helps me understand what makes millennials tick. Millennials want to know why.
Okay.
It's no good asking a millennial to do something generally. They want to know why. And actually, that works for me because I like to tell people why, or I'd like to help people understand why. But they definitely, and of course they use different forms of training methods and materials. So they don't necessarily like to be sat in a classroom in front of a blackboard, being talked at. They use mobile phones all the time. They're used to working, gamification is a buzzword that's sort of appeared over recent years, hasn't it? And so a lot of the training that we now deliver has a certain element of gamification in it to try and keep the mind switched on, But I also think attention span has a big thing to do with it. E-learning is increasingly common now. Logging on to some set of modules and watching something, maybe interacting with it and then doing some questions at the end. For me, e-learning and the like only works as a form of blended learn.
Yep.
You know, if you can blend different types of learning together and create a package, then you can deliver something that then you can land. But if you try and deliver a process in just one form, it just doesn't work with the young people of today, if you like, you know. But let's not forget the age groups.
Absolutely.
You know, people can reskill. You know, we saw it through COVID, didn't we? That a lot of people fallen out of the employment and took early retirement.
Yep.
Come out of COVID, and now they're finding that actually was that the right thing to do, and some people want to come back into the workplace. So there are opportunities for older people to come back into the workplace and diversify and move within the different levels, if you like. I myself, you know, when I think about my learning, you know, I went back to university back in 2018. I never went to university, never had that opportunity. You know, I went through my training years at college and then went into full-time employment, and I never went to uni, I never got a degree or anything like that. But because back in 2018, I had a great leader, great boss in the people team. I'd met Jim Saker at an event. Jim had just put together a program for people like me, people in automotive that had got to where they got to be without ever going through uni. And I thought, that looks like a good idea. Selfishly, I wanted to do it for me, but equally, I wanted to do it to see whether it was something that other leaders in our organisation could benefit from. So I began a master's degree on an apprenticeship programme in 2018 at Loughborough University through Jim. And it was quite ironic because at the time I was leading our apprenticeship scheme. So the head of apprenticeships was an apprentice. And I quite liked that, you know. So 3 years in, I graduated. I got my master's. Happy days. You know, my wife was able to see me again. But of course, what made that a reality was that you were doing it on your job, and I was able to tailor my projects and my assignments to my work life. And so a lot of the projects that I was doing at the time for Halfords were my assignments in my master's. And so, you know, I think those are great programs to do, and I'd recommend them to anybody. And if you can do it through an apprentice program through the levy, then it costs you very little from an organisation point of view.
It's as I said at the beginning, a living embodiment. But I think you're right. I mean, that sort of practical kind of application of learning is a brilliant sort of insight that you've sort of shared here. I wish this could be a longer interview, to be honest, because this is a really great conversation, but I'm very conscious of your time. You're obviously a huge proponent of kind of learning and development, and when you're you know you're in the boardroom with the Halfords folks. Give me the business case. You know, what's the ROI of this?
I think coming back to sort of the points you've already made, you know, some of the questions you asked earlier about what are the challenges, we cannot recruit our way out of where we are at the moment. It's impossible. The recruitment pool that we're all fishing in is getting shallower and shallower and shallower. And so, and what you're finding is that people in automotive, and particularly vehicle technicians, MOT testers as an example, are moving around from employer to employer, and they're going wherever the next pay increase is. And so this recruitment process at the moment is just building this wage inflation that none of us can afford. You know, as a business, you can't afford it. The consumer can't afford it. It's just inflating everything. So we cannot recruit our way out of this. Anybody in automotive, it's not possible. So therefore, the business case, the return on investment, if you like, is to grow your own. You know, and it's a well-served line. You know, it's quite old now, but growing your own is absolutely the way to go forward. Because, you know, if you think about apprenticeships for technicians, they're generally 3 years long. So you've got somebody locked in for 3 years. You know, if you've done your selection processes properly and you've got them into a great college or a great training provider, you've got them in a garage with a great mentor, you've got them for 3 years. So in that 3 years, they're going from 17, 18 to sort of 20, 21, 22. And then, but the key is then following that on post-apprenticeship. So having that career pathway with that graduated set of training courses that increase their value, not just to us, but to themselves, because people work for people. So why would they want to move on? if you've invested all this time and they've invested all this time into you. Now, at the end of the day, people will still move, and you've got to accept that. And actually, that's one of the hardest things in the boardroom for people to accept, that people do move on. But as long as you accept that they're going to move on, but potentially they're going to come back, and when they do come back, they come back with new experience, which only then improves and builds on the skills base that you've got. So, I hope that answers your question, but it very much is, for me, it's all about growing your own. I mean, we're bringing in 200 apprentices this year. We brought in 100 last year, but that's after a couple of years of none, because COVID stopped everything.
Right.
It stopped big employers from investing in things like apprenticeships, and we lost apprentices during that time. Automotive lost apprentices during that time, and we're all we're feeling that pain now, 3 years later, because those young people would have qualified now. They would be your qualified technicians today. So, all you can do is look back on it and learn about what to do differently in the future. God, let's hope we don't ever go through that again.
Yeah,
feels like ancient history now, doesn't it?
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah.
But yeah, growing your own, the business case is there. It's not easy to get approval for it because it's a lot of cost, and you don't get that productivity, that return on that investment for quite a while. That's challenging. But equally, recruiting from a smaller and smaller skills pool, bringing people in that perhaps aren't as skilled as you need them to be and paying more for it, equally, that isn't sustainable either.
That's absolutely right. The price of that, the cost of that. I think that's interesting, and the fact that you've sort of kind of build in that sort of more sort of medium-term sustainability kind of aspect to kind of the business when you're putting the case to the board. You mentioned a word there, future. So I think I'll just sort of end on a kind of a bit of future gazing, if that's all right. Sort of draw some lines for me. Where's this all going?
Wow. Well, it certainly isn't about today. It's definitely about tomorrow. So I look ahead. I long for the day when I can jump into my car and say, take me home, and it takes me home, and that's not that far away. In fact, it's here today. We just haven't switched it on yet because from a legislation point of view, we're a little bit concerned that everything's going to work properly in the environments that we live in, So I think, there are some milestones. I mean, I suppose the first one is already out there, 2035, the ban of petrol and diesel vehicles. That was originally 2030. I think if we see a different government in the next election, that will probably go back to 2030. So that's not that far away. And of course, all the vehicle manufacturers now are putting every effort into electric. There aren't that many petrol and diesel cars that aren't electrified in some ways that are available now. So I think, there's a milestone. But I think, I was in, I'm lucky enough to go to the Consumer Electronics Show at Las Vegas. Wow. And you see all sorts of things there. And I always look at CES as being 3 to 4 years ahead. So there was an electric flying car there. Now, I would have never thought that we would have an electric flying car when you think about batteries and weight and all the rest of it. But is that possibly the future? I'm not sure. But I think drones up in our skies, collecting and delivering parcels and things like that, I don't think that's very far away. Mobility is definitely changing. You've only got to look at the big towns and cities to see how that's changing. The future of the car, I think, is away from towns and cities. I think mobility in towns and cities is much more about, the public transport.
Multimodal kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. There are challenges along the way. I live in the countryside. It's not easy to run electric cars in the countryside, and I think those sort of we've got to see charge points and things like that increase. But then equally, batteries in cars are going to get much better in the coming years. Not that far away now. So batteries will become smaller, much more energy dense, which means that charging times come down. Range increases. So that's not far away. So like I said to you at the beginning, I see this decade as being hugely exciting, huge exciting for automotive.
And apply that world that you've just imagined for me to skills and training. What does that look like?
Again, massively exciting. The days of car mechanics getting their hands dirty are reducing. The ability, we're already working with virtual reality and augmented reality. So, having somebody in a location logged on to a headset that somebody else is wearing in a different part of the country, guiding them through a repair, means that you don't have to have people travelling here, there, and everywhere. It means that you can have different sets of skills in sites. So, I definitely see those sorts of things being the future for skills. There are probably new methods of learning that we haven't even thought about yet. And again, that's exciting because we'll figure those out. Ronnie Wilson's just developed this VR set, and what's fantastic about that is it creates an environment for people to learn where they don't have to be fearful of what people are thinking of them, or what others are saying, or what they're in this zone, world themselves. And so all these types of things are here already, and no doubt will be developed and changed and increase and grow as the next few years grow. And and I just hope and pray that we're able to continue bringing more and more people into automotive, seeing it for a future career that it should be for people that today they perhaps aren't aware of. Convincing parents that kids don't need to go to uni, they can come to automotive, have a fantastic career, and do uni later on, like I did. Then we definitely have a hugely exciting future.
Andy, thank you so much for coming in today. Brilliant conversation, and I hope you're going to come back and tell us all about that future you've just described.
Love to.
Thanks again.